Hello, these are Flip Notes 1.5 Part 3. We're still in sensation and perception, and this time we're talking about vision, but instead of the anatomy, how we actually process those visual signals. My Bitmoji's got a rainbow this time because we're talking about color and how our brain and our eyes are able to recognize colors. Let's go.
So we mentioned the fovea and the blind spot in the last video, and these are actually specific areas within the retina. Remember, the retina is the area, the back lining of the eye, and it's filled with light receptors, the rods and the cones. Well, the rods and cones are not placed evenly along the retina. We tend to have more rods in the edges in our peripheral vision, and then we have more cones that are concentrated towards the center of the retina. So the fovea is the central point of the eye or in the retina where we have lots of cones clustered together. So that makes it our best angle for color vision and our sharpest vision. So if you were wanting to look at art or look at something you're really trying to analyze and you want to see all the colors, you want to stand directly in front of it. So you're staring straight forward through your fovea. You don't want to be looking at it like this through your peripheral vision. You want to look straight forward through your fovea where you have the most cones. Now, in contrast to that, we also have a blind spot. You'll recall down here that there's a spot in the retina where the optic nerve has to exit the eye. So that gap right there are no rods or cones. And this is actually kind of in your peripheral vision, the spot where your blind spot is. And we'll do a demo in class where you can try to find your blind spot, but it's the part of the retina where the optic nerve leaves the eye. It's also called the optic disc, and there are no rods or cones there, so it's our blind spot. What about nearsighted versus farsighted? So these actually have to do with the shape of the eyeball. If you do not wear glasses at all, if you've got perfect vision, well, you also have perfectly shaped eyeballs. So good for you, perfectly shaped eyeballs. But lots of people don't have that, and this can actually change over time. People who are nearsighted have an elongated eyeball, and that causes the focus point to fall in the sort of in the front of the retina rather than directly on the retina. So this causes them to see faraway objects as blurry. So if you're nearsighted, that means you have sight of near things. So things up close you can see. Things far away, those are the things you're going to be squinting and trying to see. The opposite, and you can see that in the image here, that the flowers are clear, but the stuff in the background are blurry. Farsighted is the opposite, that they have sort of a shortened shaped eyeball, and the main focus actually could fall of the retina can fall behind the retina. So for people who are farsighted, they can see far away, but things that are close up are real blurry. So these are the people who and I have this, I can't see things real close, so I'm gonna kind of hold it out from me and try to read it like that. And again, it has to do with the shape of the actual eyeballs. As for colors and light, we as humans were only able to see a small portion of the electromagnetic spectrum, and that's what we call visible light. The colors we see are at different wavelengths of that visible light. And when we see a color, it's because light waves are hitting an object and then they bounce back to us at varying speeds. So colors that are not being absorbed by an object, they are reflected back to us. So really, like an object is all the colors except the color that we see. So for example, an orange, like the fruit, it's absorbing all the colors, but it won't absorb orange, and orange is reflecting back to us. So really, the orange is all the colors except orange. So should we really be calling an orange? Shouldn't we be calling it a not orange? Something to think about. More about color, we actually can refer to color as the hue, and that again is measured by the wavelength, by how long and how frequent these waves of light are that are coming into the eye. The wavelength is the distance from the peak of one wave to the peak of the next. Longer wavelengths tend to make more reddish colors. Oh, here we go, got it moving. If you look up here, the reddish colors are farther apart. So they have a longer, wider wavelength, whereas the ones at the bottom have a shorter, tighter wavelength, and that gives us more of these blues and purples. Here, looking at it on sort of a scale, those reddish and darker colors on this end, and then the bluish to darker on the short end. I would say you do not need to memorize where these colors are within their wavelengths. Just knowing that wavelength is what determines hue or color. As far as the brightness of a color, that has to do with the intensity of the light wave. Waves that are intense are going to be more frequent and have higher amplitude. And then the amplitude is how high each wave is. So the amount of energy, which is determined by the amplitude. We're going to watch a TED Ed animation of this in class that will explain all this a little bit more. Our brain has the ability to process multiple aspects of visual information at a time, and we call this parallel processing. And this is kind of occurring in that visual association area where we talked about lots of things happening at once. It can divide a visual scene into subdivisions. So while we're looking at one thing at one time, there's all these little kind of like zones that it'll create. And it can create them based off of color, depth, form or shape, and movement. In this one, we just have to demonstrate in class, and we'll do some parallel processing there. Color vision, Hermann von Helmholtz was one of the first to kind of recognize that we have different color receptors in our eyes, or specifically in our retina, that are more sensitive to different wavelengths. Thomas Young identified what he called the trichromatic theory of color. His theory said, well, he recognized that we have three primary colors, red, green, blue, and then if you combine those, they can form white. So he said, well, we must have the same kind of light receptors in our eyes as well. So he said that we have three color receptors, the cones, and if you recall, there were red cones and green cones and blue cones, and that each of those are sensitive to different types of wavelengths of light, and that's how we see the different colors, is that it's this combination of what each of those cones are seeing. Color deficiency or color blindness really kind of supports this theory. Color blindness occurs when a person's cones aren't functioning properly. And there's different types. Some people are dichromats, which means they can see some colors, but not all. And the most common type of that is where they can't distinguish between reds and blues. Or is it reds and greens? Let me see. I'm having a brain fart. Reds and greens, yes. Other type is totally color deficient, which is actually fairly rare. Some other things about color deficiency, it's genetic. The most common form of color blindness is where they can't distinguish between red and green. So if you're not colorblind, you should be able to see a number popping out here because there's green and red. And again, complete color deficiency exists, and you'd be seeing the world in black and white and shades of gray, but it's actually pretty rare. But this supports that trichromatic theory because the idea that you could see some colors like red or green, but not all of them, the idea that some of those, that you have cones that are specific to just some wavelengths of light.
A little more detail here about color blindness. Two specific types, monochromatism versus dichromatism. With monochromatism, they have complete color blindness, which is pretty rare. So we know that cones are required for color vision. So with monochromatism, none of their cones are functioning. So they can only see shades of gray, black, and white. With dichromatism, some of their cones work, but not all. So only two of the three types of cones are available to perceive color. Now, you're not required to know all these other types here, but just so you know, they vary based on which cone does work. Protanopia, they have blindness to red caused by a lack of red cones, so they can see some others. Deuteranopia, they're insensitive to green, so they can see other colors, and it's a little bit cut off here, but the other type is where they're sensitive. They don't have blue cones working, so they lack their blue colors. Here an example showing the difference between the three. Trichromacy would be normal, all three of their colors working. Dichromacy, this one, they can see their blue shades, but not the others. And then monochromacy, we see that they have only shades of gray that they can see.
Another theory for color vision is the opponent process theory, and the key word here is opponent or opposite. This says that color perception depends on receptors that make opposite responses, and that there's three pairs of colors, red, green, yellow, blue, and black, white. And this also supports color blindness theory, or color blindness also supports this theory because people who may have red-green color blindness are fine with yellow, blue, and black, white. One of the ways that we can kind of see the opponent process theory in action is through after images. We're actually going to do this in class, but if you want to do it right now, you could. But if you were to stare at this flag, and we'll do it in class for a full minute, directly on that dot, you would see an after image when you switch your focus to something else. And we'll use a white screen, but really you could see it anywhere. But what will happen is everything will go to the opposite color. So remember we had red, green, yellow, blue, black, white. So that yellow is going to switch to blue, black is going to switch to white, and the green is going to switch to red, and our black to white. You will see the right colored flag. So what will happen is that you will have fatigued or worn out your rods and cones, and then it will show the opposite one. That it basically says that each of your cones can show one of two colors. And when they wear out one, you see the other. We'll try it out in class.
We're going to finish here with two specific types of visual disorders. Prosopagnosia, which is more commonly known as face blindness, is when a person has difficulty recognizing familiar faces, sometimes including their own. And there's varying types. Some people can actually see faces, like facial features, but they just cannot connect them to memories of people that they actually know. And including themselves. Others cannot even see facial features, and then faces just appear as blurs. So then they have to rely on alternative routes to recognition to figure out who these people are. Sometimes it's non-facial things like hair, gait, which is how people walk, their common clothing, voice. Sometimes people will just have to announce who they are when they come up, because they know the person cannot recognize them. Causes of this, more commonly, it's developmental. So the person is born with this. And again, there's a wide range of levels of prosopagnosia, and then also brain trauma, specifically to the occipital lobe. Our other type of disorder that's included here is blind sight. And blind sight's really pretty interesting and kind of hard to explain and understand, and it's still not fully understood by researchers. But with blind sight, somebody who is blind has damage to their primary visual cortex, but they're still somehow able to see, or at least have this instinct or intuition to where things are in their visual field that they can't actually see. So for example, in studies they've done with this, they'll have people walk down a hallway filled with all kinds of obstacles, and even though the people cannot actually see them, they're actually able to avoid the different obstacles in the hallway. So they can still even react sometimes to facial expressions, like they know somebody's crying or somebody's smiling. They can react to sudden movements. They just kind of say that they have a feeling something is there, but it's not a normal visual sensation. So as for why this happens, it's because of how complex vision is processed in our brain. So while they may have damage to different elements of vision, usually with blind sight, their retinas and their cones and their rods are still working. So the brain is getting the visual signals from the environment, but the damage is there in the brain, in the cortex areas. So other elements of the cortex are able to process it, but they can't have a conscious recollection of it. So upper areas of their brain are processing the information, and so it's in there, but they can't actually see anything, but they know that they can detect a smile, or that they can feel spatially that there is an object there in their way. It's kind of like how when we talked about with Split Brain Joe, how when he couldn't send signals to where speech was located in his brain, but he knew that those things were still there and he could draw them, but they were just there in his brain. So pretty amazing ways that our brain works. All right, that's it for the section on visual processing.